Yes, go ahead.
Do you know who holds the patent or the copyright for the Common Core? And you kind of went through the process of how you arrived at the match standards. Could you kind of briefly walk us through the process if 2 years down the road we find out that what we thought was going to happen?
I'm not the person to answer that. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm not the person to answer that question. Chris Minnick from CCSSO is here, and I think he might be able to answer it. My job is done. I finished work in 2010. I don't have any control over the standards anymore. As far as I'm concerned, the standards are owned by the states who adopted them, and they're theirs to do with them as they please. The issue of changes and the standards, I just don't know what the plans are for that, or whether I will even be involved in those plans. My understanding of the copyright issue is that there was a desire to make sure that commercial publishers couldn't sort of take part of the standards and sort of use them for commercial purposes without permission. But I'm not really the expert.
Thank you, Representative Plano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sir, for being here with us today. We heard from a math teacher last week. The main complaint about the math standards with the learning and the assessment tasks do not match. Specifically, she talked about and gave an example that students in Algebra 1 are now expected to be able to complete the square, something many students are not ready to learn yet. Algebra students, when learning based upon the Common Core standards, are supposed to learn about increasing and decreasing functions, something she was not taught in calculus until calculus. Many trig concepts, including double angle and half angle formulas, have been replaced in Algebra 2 curriculum, while matrices and conics have been moved to the fourth year or advanced material. So can you speak a little bit about this teacher's frustration and very real concern?
Sure.
That simply the students are not learning in what you argued was a normal sequence.
Okay. So I want a couple of things to say in response to that. First, I completely sympathize with teachers who are on the ground implementing these standards. There's a lot of work to be done, and it's not easy at all. I want to say the standards are different from the curriculum. So the standards in high school actually don't dictate a sequence. In high school, because there are many different opinions in this country about sequencing of courses in high school, we declined to dictate any course sequence. We simply described a body of material that students should learn during their high school careers, without saying whether it was which pieces were going to go in Algebra 1, which pieces were going to go in Algebra 2, which might go into a fourth year advanced course. That's really up to states, districts, whatever the mechanisms are for local control in the states that adopt the standards. So I can't address questions about the sequence because we can prescribe a sequence. That's really a matter of implementation and what their district has chosen to do. That said, I would say that some of the things she's concerned about are not unusual in other districts. It's not unusual, for example, to have trig in Algebra 2. Usually a school will have a course called Algebra 2 trig, which is like an enhancement of Algebra 2, and to leave matrices and vectors and conic sections for more advanced course. That's not an innovation. It may be a variation between what she was used to and what happens in other districts. There has been a lot of variation historically across the country about what happens in Algebra 1, what happens in Algebra 2. Completing the square is another example. In some states, in some courses, that's not in Algebra 1. In others, it is. And there just hasn't been a lot of consistency.
Representative Erickson, and then Johnson.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. McCallum, thanks. I appreciate you being here, too. A little biased, so to speak, a while. So my question is obviously biased for that, but I suppose this question could come from any state, in that are we not capable of doing our own state?
Absolutely. But the question you have to ask yourself is, why would you want to when you have good standards already? I think that states before had been individual states had spent 20 years adopting, revising, and rewriting their own standards. There were, to be honest, some states were better at it than others, and I'm not going to say anything about Ohio. But Ohio certainly had a fantastic Department of Education. The people working from the state had already been working, I think you're probably going to hear from Brad Findell about this, had already been working on pretty high quality standards. So certainly you had the expertise in 2009, 2008 to produce high quality standards. So did Massachusetts. But at some point, I think the state said, well, why are we all reinventing the wheel over and over again in our own states? Standards are a foundation on which we can build important elements of the education system, like testing and teaching and teacher preparation and curriculum. And that's really where the local talent comes in. Why don't we just agree once and for all what they're only standards after all. All they do is they just say, here's the math we think kids should learn in 3rd grade. Here's the math we think kids should learn in 4th grade. Why don't we agree on that? And then we can stop that work of continually rewriting and reinventing the wheel. So I don't doubt the capability of any individual state to do this sort of work, but the states decided themselves, maybe we should combine resources, and that's really where the Commo comes.
Go ahead.
I can appreciate your answer. So where do we go to from here as standards nationally change, and we may not agree at the state with some of those foundation standards that differ from what we are accepting today?
I'm not here to tell you what to do in your state. I think any states voluntarily adopted the Common Core, and they can voluntarily leave the Common Core. And I think that's a proper process of state decision making. I don't have any. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I am here to tell you that the Common Core are good, and there's something you can work on and build your own curricula, your own course sequences in high school based on them, and that's very much the prerogative of the state, and I think it is a matter and should be a matter of local control.
Representative Johnson, your question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. I guess I was interested in this point about how Ohio can make it Ohio's standards, because they are copyrighted standards, which means we can't change a single thing until the consortium decides that they want to change them. So, I guess the question I wanted to ask you is, do you understand, as somebody who's been intimately involved with Common Core, how much the standards, the assessments, in other words, Ohio theoretically could change how they want to teach this, but the assessment's going to measure the absorption of the standards. So the assessments and the standards are intimately linked, and in between goes the curriculum.
Right.
So I guess my question to you is, do you think that's a good thing for Ohio, that we can't change the standards, we can't change the assessments in terms of their linkage together, and therefore we're going to be somewhat thwarted? We did have a teacher last week who said she'd been a math teacher and had quit over that sequencing issue, that the prerequisites were not there to get folks on that STEM path. So I guess the question.
Okay. On this issue of not being able to change the standards, it's not quite true. When states adopted the standards, they were told that they could add standards, 15%. So a lot of states did that. Many states didn't do much of that. But so there are variations. Arizona added a few standards in grades 3 and 5, I think, maybe 1 or 2 in high school. So there was that flexibility. And also, there are states that have revised the standards. Florida went through a whole process of public comment on the standards and made a few changes. I don't see why Ohio couldn't do that, but I'm not an expert on what different states can and cannot do with their own governing processes. So I don't think that's as much of an issue as it's been portrayed, although again, I'm not really the expert on that. I think Chris Minnick is. I certainly think that Ohio should feel that it owns the standards. That is to say, it should take a look at them. Look at, if people don't like the standards, they should point to which standard they don't like, or they should say, I like this one, I don't like that one. They should definitely have a process. In fact, I think they did go through that process in 2009, 2010 with their teachers, all the teams that Brad brought together. I think there is more flexibility than than has been stated in some cases in implementing these standards. There's a huge amount that happens between the writing of standards. They're just like a statement of, here's what we want kids to know by the end of grade 3, here's what we want kids to know by the end of grade 8. There's a huge, the way to get there can be very localized and can be very subject to sort of modification and revision within the state. So I don't think it's impossible for Ohio to work with these standards in a flexible way.